Hey, Chuck, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for making the time today to chat with me a little bit and just share some of your knowledge with our viewers and our listeners. So again, thank you for being here.
Hey Gabe, how you doing? I appreciate you having me today.
Yeah, my pleasure. So first and foremost, Chuck, why don't you just introduce yourself really quickly for the listeners out there that don't necessarily know who you are yet?
Excellent. My name is Chuck Omphalius. I'm a financial services professional. I focus primarily on income and tax sheltering of income in retirement. I'm out of New York. It's where my home office is. I have an office in Florida. I have one in Mobile, Alabama. I have one in San Francisco. Work with people all over the country, and I'm a veteran, a dad, and a grandfather. Have the best dog in the world. Just like everybody else.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. And yeah, as we just identified, both of us we're in the Army, slightly different times, but thank you for your service. Certainly,
Thank
as
you.
we just passed Veterans Day, I really do appreciate your service. And as we had talked about, I'm thankful to have had the opportunity to serve, as I'm sure
Yeah,
you are as well.
absolutely, absolutely.
So great. Well, with that, Chuck, and you mentioned this when you just introduced yourself. You talked about it sort of as an income specialist, income planner in retirement, right? And what I would love to ask you first and foremost, because I'm hearing this topic more and more right now, is the importance of having income in retirement versus having assets in retirement, right? Having assets is great, but income is what's needed in retirement, right?
I
So
agree. Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about, when you say you're really a retirement income specialist and planner, what do you mean? And talk to me maybe about one of the highest level strategies you use with your clients.
Okay. So I've always been a big proponent of it's not what you have, it's what you get to keep and what you spend, right? So one of the big things that we're looking to do at my firm, Max It Out Retirement, is exactly that. We want to max out what you can actually get out of it. As you mentioned, having an asset base is wonderful, except it's only as good to you as what your lifestyle needs are and how it covers them, right? So the first thing that comes into play whenever we're talking about assets, and it's probably one of the last things I hear from a new client that's not working or used to working with an income specialist, is taxes, right? They're not considering the taxation of your income, right? And their assets are sitting, many people, a large portion of them, the ones they set aside for retirement, they're sitting in a pre-tax form, a qualified account, an IRA, a 401k, something like that. And if you go back to the inception of the IRA, when our country kind of shifted from the defined benefit or pension plan strategy to the defined contribution or 401k strategy, there's a reason why the employers did that, right? Because they didn't want to be on the hook, right?
Right.
It's much easier for you to be on the hook, right? So if they're going to put X number of dollars in, how those dollars perform and what situations you need them in, better served to pass the buck on that, right? Give that to the consumer, the client, the employee in this case, right? So what we've tried to focus on at my firm is doing a really good needs analysis of the individual or the family that we're working with, taking a look at their assets and really determining what do you need to survive. And there's a couple things that are going to play into this, right? First of all, we're at all-time tax lows right now, right? So the federal effective tax rate on anyone's income, regardless of how much income you make, is lower right now than at any point after 1913, which is when the first permanent tax was imposed. So if taxes are at all-time lows and you're deferring money into these accounts at an all-time low, and then sometime later in life, you want to take money from it, and then you're going to rely on it for a long period of time. right? I mean, I don't think we plan on being retired for 10 years. I think we all plan for 30, right? So
Or
whether
at
we
least
get there,
we should be planning on at least 30, right? Given
absolutely,
life
right.
expectancies and such, correct?
Absolutely, right? So what people don't really think about or isn't top of mind is the idea of, if that money hasn't yet been taxed, what will my tax burden be, right? So right now, if you're a married couple making $120,000 a year, your federal effective tax rate is about 14%, right? Now, listen, I live in New York. If you're making 120 grand a year as a married couple, you're broke. It's a poverty line, right? Some parts of the country, you live a little better than that. That's going to lead to the next part of this, which is inflation. But when you go back to 1978, right, as the retirement planning kind of rules were changing from the deferred comp to the I'm sorry, from the defined benefit to the defined income solution, or defined contribution solution. Um, right at that same time frame, we experienced some major tax changes, right? The Reagan administration came in, and in the early 80s, taxes changed considerably. If you go back to 78, 80, that kind of turn, um, and you look at a married couple making 60,000 a year, probably similar lifestyle to the couple making 120 today. You look at a couple making 60,000 a year, that their federal effective tax rate was 52%.
Wow.
Now, ironically, but not really, I mean, kind of, it's not a coincidence, it's that these things factor together. That's also the last time we had no significant federal debt. So when the 401k came about, or the defined contribution strategy started to take shape, the landscape that we were in financially as a country was the stock market was stagnant for a decade. It was less than, the Dow was at less than 3,000, not going anywhere, right? The advent of the 401k really helped to pump money into the markets. We were at all time, not all time, but we were at tax highs. We were literally a middle-class couple was giving 50% of their income back to the federal government, right? And the tax rates not only being high, and we were also sitting on no federal debt. It was the last time it didn't show. So you look at those three factors, and then you flip-flop them, right? It's almost 2022, right? We're at the end of 21, and we're now at all-time tax lows, right?
Mhm.
We stock markets, the Dow is up 35,000, right? It's more than 15 times what it was at that point. And our federal debt's out of control, right? They literally signed today, if we're time stamping, they signed the infrastructure legislation into law today. And there's another major bill on Capitol Hill for more spending on what they're calling the Build Back Better plan, right? If you look at, I was talking to you right before we jumped on the interview. I'm preparing for a Forbes article that I'm writing, and as we were going through that today, I was going through all of the spending that the federal government has done since COVID hit, right? And the Build Back Better bill is not signed into law yet, but it's rumored to be just shy of $2 trillion. If that's added, that'll bump us from 6 trillion to 8 trillion in new legislation that was promised, that borrowed in the last 18 months. To put that in perspective, our federal budget is $6 trillion, right? Annually, right? So it's just, you need to know what you're going to have to spend when you retire. And it's my opinion, and a bus token will get you on a bus, but it's my opinion that when the majority of the people who I'm speaking to, my core clientele tends to be, late 50s, early 60s, when they're ready to retire, sometime early in their retirement, throughout their retirement, they're going to be taxed at a much higher rate than they are today.
Right.
You got to take that into consideration, right? If you don't, and the government's going to be taxing you at those rates that are closer to what they were the last time the federal debt wasn't a problem, right? If they want to get that back under control in any way, shape, or form, then you got to count on that. You got to prepare for that. So we do a lot of Roth conversions, get the taxes paid sooner rather than later, get them out of, get your money out of the IRS's hands. And then let's meet those income needs. And that kind of the other thing I mentioned, and it's something we're dealing with, it came upon us so quickly, not that it wasn't forecasted, but inflation, right? I mean, I think we all know, I mean, I filled up my tank the other day, it was $4 a gallon, right? 15 months ago, I was spending $1.80 a gallon, right? So that's more than double. And that's, go to the grocery store, that's everything across the board right now. Right? People are excited. Yeah, you know, my home value is worth 30% more than it was before. Yeah, but the dollar is worth 30% less. So who cares, right? So these are the things that I talk to my clients about. These are the things that I want them to understand. And then, you know, I mean, how does it fit into your lifestyle or what you vision your lifestyle to be when you retire, right? What are your biggest expenses, right? Are you carrying a mortgage past retirement, right? What are your biggest, you talk about assets, what are your biggest assets, right? A lot of my clients, you know, one of their biggest assets is their home, right? Well, you know, are you using that asset properly, right? Is that money being deployed, you know, or not?
Sure.
So, yeah, that's, from an income standpoint, I mean, it's less about how much you have, it's more about how much tax-free or post-tax income it will generate. And I also want to plan for the clientele escalating income, right? I just turning on a revenue stream that's going to be a flat revenue stream, or saying I need, you know, $5,000 a month in retirement. Well, $5,000 a month in 2025 is going to be a different number than it's going to be in 2035.
Right.
Right. So you got to plan for an increase in income as well. I use a piece of software. It's called Retirement Analyzer that I do a lot of my analysis on, and it gives 107-year average inflation. That number is 3.18%. And they use that number to project out income needs and lifestyle costs.
Sure.
Well, the CPI, which measures inflation, for October was 6.2. The last time it reached 6.2, coming off on the upswing as opposed to coming back, was 1971.
Wow.
Right? And you and I are a little bit young to remember the 70s. I was a child, but if you look at inflation during the 70s, it reached double digits and it sat there for a decade. And honestly, if you think about coming out of Afghanistan in a real poor manner, not having the greatest presence on the world stage, either economically or politically, gas prices going through the roof, inflation coming upon us. I mean, this feels a lot more like 1971 going into 72 than 91, 2001, 2011. I mean, it's been a generation since we've dealt with some of these issues. But if you're not prepared for that, then, you know, you used the term, I think before, you know, what happens if your 401k is just a 201k when you retire?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Chuck, you just covered a whole lot in a very short period of time. So I appreciate that. It's a bit overwhelming, but let me go back a second and break down a few of the things that you said. First of all, you know, I heard you say that, you know, average inflation over, I think you said 107-year period was just over 3.1%, right? And now we're seeing current inflation coming out of the pandemic from, you know, COVID-19. It's over 6%, which is twice as much as what we've seen historically on average, right?
Yep.
But to me, that says exactly what you also said, which is instead of gas being $2 a gallon, it's going to be $4 a gallon, right? Which is what we're seeing. I just bought printer paper for my office, and instead of it being 40 bucks a box, it's $80 a box, right? Because there's a paper shortage. There's a shortage of everything. And you look at the ports and you see the containers are just stacked up and up and up and up all over the place. And with all that being said, it's a real problem that we have to address, and we have to help our clients to address and plan for, right? And again, one of the things that you mentioned was about a Roth conversion, and a Roth conversion or a Roth IRA conversion. So I'd like to ask you a few more questions if you don't mind, but
Sure.
let's just take an example. And let's just say that somebody has done a really great job in their working years, and they've put $1 million away and saved in an IRA. Okay. Traditional IRA. And let's just say that their, average income, what'd you say for a household is 14% federal rate. For easy math, let's call it a 20% federal and state tax rate. Is that fair?
That is fair. Absolutely. Yeah.
For easy math. So
Yep.
Somebody's got $1 million IRA, they're looking to retire, and they're at a 20% effective tax rate annually for federal and state combined,
Yep.
right? Walk me through, as that individual has to pull money out, right, at some point, because there's this thing called RMDs, required minimum distributions, because as you said, the IRS is going to have to be paid the taxes at some point. And somebody once told me that the IRS is also theirs. If you look at the word theirs, it actually means the IRS, right?
Yeah, that's great.
But as we pull money out of our IRA and our defined benefit plans, we have to pay them back, theirs, right? So talk to me maybe about the math on that story, right? Because there's money put away pre-tax, there's growth that is tax deferred, and there's a major tax liability to that client as they retire and pull money out, right? So let's paint that picture versus maybe a client who you'd help to do a Roth conversion, because as you said, taxes are an all-time low.
Right.
So if somebody's willing to pay taxes now at a lower tax rate than arguably what taxes are expected to be in the future, how this plan might be really more beneficial for them to take on the tax burden today to have the future growth benefit them in the longer term. Does that make sense?
It does. Absolutely. It's something I run into all the time. And the $1 million example, you look historically, you go back to when you were a kid. If someone told you you were going to have $1 million when you retired, you would think that's, oh, I'm rich, and that's
I'm a millionaire, right?
Right. Exactly.
Not anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm literally working with a client in Colorado right now who's got about $1.4 million liquid, and a big chunk of it is IRA money, and lifestyle is under control. House is paid off. There's no major debt. But if you figure in that they're going to pay 20% combined federal and state, the example you gave, and then you just say that over the course of their 30 years, let's say that there's 2 hikes in that 30-year period. And let's say the 20 goes to even just 25 or 28. And then again, one more time, it goes to 35, which is nowhere near the example I used earlier of the 70s and the couple paying 50%, right? Federal. But if we just look at that, and then you look at inflation at 3%, not 6, yep. And then they just, take the money out the same way they put it in, just over time as income. They have a need of $60,000 a year, $5,000 a month. That client will run out of money in their mid-80s. It's done. Now they're having to tap into the equity in their home for lifestyle, what have you. What I encourage people to do is let's look at your tax brackets right now, right? The 10% bracket. Everybody pays in the 10% bracket, right? People don't necessarily, people look at a tax chart. I make $129,000. That's 22% federal, right? That's not how it works. Your effective rate is probably going to be closer to 13 or 14, because as a married couple, your first X number of dollars are going to be paid at the 10% rate. And then between 76 and 130, it's at the 12%. And then it goes to 22 and then 24. The big jump that I focus on is the jump between 24 and 32, right? That's a big number. 8% is a chunk. There's a little bracket between 22 and 24. When you're approaching your retirement years, if your IRA can be converted to Roth, 99% of them can, right? If your IRA can be converted to Roth, what we want to look at is a married couple, anything, if you keep it below, I think it's 326.7. My number could be off just slightly, but it's the low 300s. If you can keep it below that number, you're going to pay 24%. Anything above that, you're going to be at the 32. So if you're making in those final years of retirement, if you're making 250 combined income, even after a standard deduction, then we have like $75,000 to play with. Well, guess what? If you're 58, you want to retire at 65, and you've got 7 years of $75,000, hoping they don't change the tax code, before that. They probably will, but if we could do that, well, 7 times 75, what does that get us to? That gets us, most of our money gets converted, right? The majority of what we have is now in a post-tax Roth form. The first year that you retire, you're not showing that income anymore, the working income. You can now start converting it at larger numbers, keeping it in a lower bracket. So most of the people I'm working with, it's about a 7 to a 10-year plan to get them to where the money that they planned on for retirement is now no longer taxable, right? The seed versus the harvest. I paid the tax on the seed, right? How many 50-pound bags do I need to plant my field, right? Rather than telling the guy at the seed store, keep the money, keep the tax money, don't give it to Uncle Sam today. I'm going to buy all this seed pre-tax. And then when it harvests, I'm going to pay on the harvest, right? That doesn't make any sense if you think about it in a farmer's term. It's the same thing with your IRA. If you're not going to pay the taxes on the money that you put in, you're going to let it grow. You're going to let it perform, right? And then when it comes out, first of all, even if taxes are identical, if they don't go up, the harvest is going to be a larger number than the seed, unless you're not investing very well, right?
Sure.
So, and like you said, your principal, what you invested was pre-tax, and so is the growth at an ordinary income rate. So the first thing I do with people is, we've had 11 bull markets in a row. There's a couple of anomalies in that 11-year period where the Dow looks like it went up a percentage point or two. Those are just, big money grabs at the end of the year by institutional money. By January 15th, the markets were way back up, right? I think it's 16 falls into that category, and 20 falls into that category, or 19 falls into that category. But really, we've had 11 bull markets in a row. Last time there was any major effect to money in the markets was 2008, a negative effect.
Right.
Again, I don't have a magic wand or a crystal ball, but there's going to be market corrections, right? I can't tell you exactly when. And if you look at, again, like we said about where we are in the eco-political stage, and the things that are going on around, finances don't look like they're as strong as they were 3 years ago on a national scale, right? We're just not performing as well. So to think that the markets are just going to continue to go up forever, particularly if you're getting closer to your retirement years, first thing I want to do is I want to protect that, right? Let's not lose any money. Let's make sure that at least what you have up until this point, and we're sitting at all-time highs, so what better time to pull some poker chips back off the table? You got a big stack, you started with a small one. So let's first make sure that we can't lose. Let's have a really good tax efficient strategy to get most of the taxes on what we're going to rely on for income in retirement paid now, when we know they're as low as they're ever going to be, right? And then if the first couple of years of retirement, we actually have to use the balance of that IRA to pay for lifestyle in the first few years, that's fine. I'm okay with that, because at some moment we're going to turn off reportable income and we're going to turn on income in your Roth. And when we start pulling the income from your Roth, you're off the tax grid, which most people, the other thing that I focus on, and most people don't understand, is there's a means test for your Social Security, right? It's called the provisional income tax, right? Most people have never even heard that phrase. I have people that are paying it that don't know they're paying it, or why, or don't know there's an option to not pay it, right? If you're a married couple making more than $44,000 a year, you're going to pay taxes on 85% of your Social Security check. That's reportable income. If that's coming from a Roth or for some other tax advantage strategy, then you don't have to pay taxes on that Social Security, right? If you're a married couple making $4,000 a month, 50 grand a year in Social Security between the two of you, over a 20-year period, that's $1 million. You talked about $1 million IRA. Well, now you have another $1 million of potentially taxable money. Do I really want to pay taxes on that? Or if I could avoid it, do I want to avoid it? And most people see that that income from Social Security, $1 million over 20 years, the million in my IRA, and they're like, yeah, I'm golden. Except what are the future tax rates? And am I failing the provisional income test? Right? So if we can get your IRA tax-free sooner, as soon as possible in a measured fashion, safe from market fluctuation, get income that's going to escalate and keep up with inflation. And then therefore, because we did those things properly as we were about to retire and very early in retirement, now when it's time to turn on Social Security, I don't have to pay taxes on that as well. The difference between the two is night and day. And that's what I really do. I'll run before and after models for people. This is your money. How do you want to classify it as far as the IRS is concerned? And how much income do you need?
Yeah, no, that's great, Chuck. Again, what I'm hearing you say ultimately is that most people, as they plan their retirement, are talking about how much income is needed, right, to cover lifestyle expenses and maintain their lifestyle, or what do they have in assets that can spit out an income that meets that requirement, right?
Absolutely, yep.
But so many people, as you said, are missing half the story, right? And taxes is that half a story that people just don't get. And they assume it's a requirement. And they don't realize one of the biggest strategies that you just talked about, and I'll reiterate again, is the Roth IRA conversion and converting some of these taxable assets that are deferred in tax, pay the tax now so that you can reduce your tax liability in the future, pay less in taxes on your Social Security income potentially as well. And then we'll talk about it another day, but just to put it out there, cash value life insurance, right? That's another bucket of tax-free money that people can put money into, draw on income later in life that doesn't affect that Social Security test. And then one of my favorite topics, of course, is converting home equity to usable tax-free income as well in retirement via a retirement mortgage strategy or a home equity conversion mortgage, right? So as you said, creating different buckets of money in retirement that you can pull from at different stages of retirement to manage your own tax liability, right? And at the end of the day, yes, you may have to pay taxes, but now you, is what I've heard, helped your clients understand when it's most effective to pay taxes, right? And figuring out strategies of potentially how to pay less in taxes. Not that you're avoiding taxes, but you're just strategizing in a way to pay less, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And you brought up the cash value life insurance. That may be the only option in the near future. Part of this legislation that's before us on Capitol Hill right now talks about eliminating the Roth conversions and the backdoor Roth. And they're talking about phasing it in over 10 years, right? But if the government's trying to get rid of something, then you should probably check it out before they do, right? I mean, that's just a good general rule of thumb. If they think it's better that you don't have it, then while it's still available, maybe you should go get it.
Yeah, I've seen that and heard that before, Chuck, in regards to, they've talked about multiple times getting rid of the mortgage interest deduction. And in fact, they reduced it, right? From $1 million in a mortgage plus $100,000 in home equity. What we used to have $1.1 million mortgage interest tax deductibility is now reduced to $750,000, right?
Yep.
1031 exchange, they're talking about potentially modifying because it's a great tax strategy,
Sure.
right? Section 121 of the IRS code, the primary residence exclusion of $250,000 of tax-free gain for an individual and $500 for a married couple. Talking about eliminating that because it's not that it's too good to be true, but it doesn't benefit the IRS or the government. Therefore, to your point with the Roth conversion, this is a great time and a great opportunity for clients to have a conversation with you, right? And evaluate, does it make sense to do it or does it make sense not to do, right? And what other levers do they have to pull from in retirement to create tax-free income versus tax-deferred income or taxable income?
And I think you just nailed it, is I don't think people realize that they're in control and there are levers, right? They think that whatever they committed to 20, 30 years ago, or whatever their conventional retirement analyst strategy is, that they're locked into that. I use an analogy sometimes with a new client where I talk about your entire life you've worked with somebody who's working the markets. It's their job to grow your assets, right? And when that financial planner is growing your assets and you're in your accumulation phase, right? If the markets are up, they want to beat the up. If the markets are down, they don't want to be as far down as the market, right? But if we have another 08 like event and you're close to retirement and you lose and the market goes down 38%, does it matter if your financial advisor, you only went down 28%, right? I mean, it just doesn't work, right? So the analogy that I use with clients sometimes is your entire life, you go to a doctor, right? As a small child, you're introduced to a pediatrician, right? And you're very comfortable, right? And then there's one day, it's usually around college age, you need a physical for whatever reason, and you go in and you don't fit in the chair anymore, right? You're in the waiting room and you're like, wow, there's like toys all over the place. I feel like I'm like at a place, right? And it's time to go get an internist, right? A general practitioner, and you need to turn your medical records over from somebody who is responsible for your medical care in your growth phase. And now that you're not growing anymore, you need to protect what you have. And that's the analogy that I use. If you're not in the asset accumulation phase, then you're in the asset decumulation phase. And if you're not adding to it anymore, listen, if the markets are down 20% and you're systematically buying and investing, well, then you're getting an opportunistic buy. You're buying at a lower cost average, right? If you're retired and you're not adding to it anymore and you're pulling from it, everyone says, oh, you want to know what? Yeah, the markets went down, but that's a paper loss. Not the minute you start withdrawing money. The minute you take if your plan was to take 4% of $1 million, you're going to generate 40 grand a year, right? First of all, inflation. Does the 4%, is 4% what it used to be? Well, right now it might not be. I just read a Forbes article that said that whole 4% idea is gone. It's now got to be 3.2, right? Well, okay, 3.2 is not that bad. Well, yeah, it's a 20% difference. It's 20% less income. Add that to the inflation, right? So if we need more later, right, then we got to protect what we have right now, right? I mean, it's a huge key. And you bring up the strategies of the equity in your home. A lot of times that's what I'm using for the client to pay the taxes for the Roth conversion. They're like, where am I going to come up with this money? Right? Like, you want me to pay an extra $10,000 a year in taxes over the next 7 years, right? So do the math. If I'm paying $10,000 a year in taxes, I'm converting $60,000, $70,000 a year, right? So now you want me to do that, but where am I coming up with that money? Well, if you've worked diligently and you've gotten your home down to the point where you only have 7 years left and you timed it perfect with your retirement, there's this idea that not only did we need to build these huge nest eggs, we also need to retire without a mortgage. Well, No, what you really need to do is retire without a mortgage payment, right?
Right.
Unless your kids want or need your home when you die, how important is the equity in your home to you, really? Right?
Sure.
So if we can eliminate the IRS with that wonderful asset you built, which is the equity in your home, it's a big strategy. And again, they're just moving levers. And how much am I pulling this one? And does it work with that one? And are you still working with a pediatrician?
I
So
love that. I love that analogy, Chuck. And you're absolutely right. At some point in your life, in your financial life, it's the same as your medical life, right? And at some point you actually end up moving into geriatric care,
yeah.
right?
And then you're back to the
Imagine,
bottle of the diapers.
right.
Yeah,
Imagine a 75-year-old client going to a pediatrician.
yeah,
It just doesn't fit. Just
right.
like you said, once you reach college, it doesn't fit into the chair anymore. And to your point, and I think everybody's situation is different, right? And we have to be cognizant of that, and we have to be smart, and we have to strategize based on what their goals are and their needs are. But in what I heard you say is all strategies are best achieved through an orchestrated strategy, right? It's not one lever. If you put all your money into a 401k, and because you had an employer that matched your contributions every year, and you decided to put all your money into a 401k, good for you, but that may not be the best strategy going into retirement,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Because you've only got one lever to pull from,
Right.
especially if you don't own your home and you've been renting all these years, right? So I believe, as you said, the more levers that we have to pull from, right? One of these that's tax-free, taxable, tax deferred, and so forth, that we can create an orchestrated strategy where home equity is a wonderful strategy, right? But it's not the only strategy. And I would never recommend to a client only use that, right? You look at some of the research that guys like Dr. Wade Fowle have done, right? And Barry Sachs have done with Monte Carlo simulations with these orchestrated strategies, because as you said, and look, March 2020 was not that long ago where we saw more than a 30% downturn in the market.
Right.
And if you were retiring, right, in 2020, you can't time that.
Right.
Right. And I've heard people say that the 5 years pre-retirement and the 5 years right when you retire are the most critical financial years of anybody's retirement.
Agreed.
And some of what we're talking about here is really, first of all, I think working with someone like yourself to help create a plan and an income plan, right? Because as you said, Chuck, managing assets and getting assets to grow through the accumulation stages, right? And as you're in your earnings years is one strategy. And no offense to any financial advisor out there like yourself, but that's not the hard part.
No.
Right? The hard part is diversifying those assets into the right buckets so that those buckets can spit out an income, right? When it's most important, as we're talking about, and creating that strategy earlier on in your earnings years, right? Getting in touch with a client in your 30s and your 40s and your 50s, not waiting till your 60s to really start to put these plans into place. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be ideal. That would be to get people to subscribe would be a tremendous thing. But the biggest key for me and anyone I deal with is the stuff we're doing right now, education. Right? I at no point in my career have I ever thought I'm your solution. Right? No, there's solutions out there for you, and I'm educated on the things that are available that can help you achieve those goals. And if it's not the things that I'm going to help you with, you need to find somebody who's going to, right? I mean, that's the key. That financial advisor, and again, I have nothing against them. I work with them on a daily basis with my clients who are going to diversify, right?
Sure.
You're never going to leave those people completely, right? Warren Buffett's rule of 100: take your age, subtract it from 100, and as you get older, that's the percentage of assets you should feel comfortable at risk, right? So this is a guy that's got the largest stock portfolio, if not on the planet, one of, right? And
Sure.
he's telling you, if you're 70, whatever, he's got to be 80 right now. He's telling you only 20% of my assets are actually in my stock portfolio. The other 80% are going to be completely sheltered from risk, right? He's also sheltering them from taxes, right?
Right.
So risk, taxes, inflation aren't things you're hearing from the financial advisor when you're 48 and putting the money away, right?
That's right.
When you're 65 and you're ready to start taking it, and the specialist that you're dealing with doesn't deal in the things that are going to affect you most at that time in your life, it's time for the new specialist, right? So, and again, that's no, it's no dig against the people that do the planning stuff pre-retirement.
Sure.
I do planning stuff, like you said, the 5 years before and the 5 year after are everything. You're correct. It absolutely is.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things I heard you say, Chuck, again, is, taxation, inflation, and risk, right?
Yeah.
Three things that clients have a really hard time wrapping their arms around and grasping without the advice of someone like yourself, right? And being able to have that insight, because unfortunately, we all get emotionally charged and emotionally attached when it comes to finances,
Yep.
right? And to avoid getting emotionally charged, it does require the help of a professional to evaluate those factors and ultimately producing guaranteed income, right? And to be able to put a strategy in place that does help produce guaranteed income, where it also addresses risk and inflation and taxation. Now that does require a team of professionals. And yeah, you might not be the guy to do it all for your clients, and neither am I. But
Right.
that's why we're here talking to each other, because it's building a team of a team of professionals, or what I call an A team,
Yeah.
right? That I may know enough to be dangerous, but I can also make the introduction to a client like you to be able to say, here's someone you need to talk to get more information or to put a strategy in place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You
So
nailed it.
Chuck, hey, this has been awesome. I appreciate your time, really appreciate your insights and sharing the information and just giving it away. That's part of what our team believes most, and most importantly right now is providing free education, truthfully, because our what we have found historically is that just many of our clients don't know what they need to know. Well, awesome. Again, thanks, Chuck. I really appreciate it. We'll talk to you later.